Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, we'll be talking to two people leading the charge to stop child sexual abuse in Texas and in the nation. Just ahead.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home. We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network. We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show. Well, if you've watched this show for any length of time, you know sometimes I'm interviewing business leaders and sometimes I'm putting a spotlight on a company. I cannot think of a better, more important issue to talk about today than child sexual abuse. And here with a couple of people who know something about it, Jenna Quinn, she's an author, speaker, advocate, and Representative Tan Parker. He's with the state representative of House District 63.
That's right.
And that's like Flower Mound, is that right?
Southwest corner of Denton County today. That's right.
Awesome.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being on the show. And let's start with you, Jenna. Mm-hmm. So tell us your story.
Well, my story is out there. You know, currently I did a TEDx talk, I've written a book, and, have developed several trainings and have done several interviews to share my story as a means to educate and inspire and to prevent, most importantly. What we learned from myself and my parents as a family is that this crime is very preventable when you actually start to look at the grooming tactics of perpetrators, the way they operate, the way they groom their survivors, but also the families. And that's really my story. And it's very similar to, the 42 million other survivors of child sexual abuse in our country. And I was groomed by someone that I knew and trusted, somebody that my family knew and trusted. And unfortunately, that's what we see with this crime, Jeff. I wish it wasn't the case, but many times what makes this very difficult for survivors to tell is because many times they do know the perpetrator. They use that, known and trusted relationship as a deposit for the child's silence. And so for me, being hurt by someone that you know, being someone that you trust, somebody that your family trusts, makes it very difficult to tell because you know that there will also be consequences for loved ones. My best friend's father basically was my perpetrator. And, all of this happened within the context of a private Christian school growing up. And so you hate to see that happen. But unfortunately, there's no institution, there's no environment that this is, excluded from. This crime, unfortunately, is very pervasive. So for me, I changed in every way possible. Like so many survivors, I, developed depression. I went from making good grades to failing. I had horrible night terrors, horrible insomnia. I mean, my physical appearance even started to change. And I was threatened not to tell. And it's a very scary place. So I know what it's like to, carry those shackles of shame, so to speak. And so my teachers were trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I was going in for tutoring after class. I even, unfortunately, ended up in the emergency room from hives a couple of times after the sexual assault happened. That's how my body responded physiologically to the stress. And my doctor visits didn't stop there. Unfortunately, my parents were really, really worried, trying to find a reason for what was wrong. And we see this happening a lot today. I was tested for learning disabilities. Imagine going through all of this testing when that's really not the underlying issue. The underlying issue is trauma. And so they tested my thyroid. Maybe there's something wrong with her thyroid. I was gaining weight. My hair was falling out. And, they tested to see if I was anemic because of low energy, but it was really depression. And so all that to say, I changed emotionally, behaviorally, and spiritually. Yet nobody really knew what the warning signs were. And so after I told my sister, it was really this, profound moment. I made my outcry to my older sister, thank goodness. And, it was just this moment where I went in to have my SANE exam, which is a sexual assault nurse exam. And my mom is waiting in the lobby of the Children's Advocacy Center, which is where I was able to receive services. They did a beautiful job, with counseling and the interview and everything. But I'm having this exam, and my mom's in the lobby, and to pass the time, she's very nervous, and she's looking at, some reading material. And she picks up this pamphlet. Now, keep in mind, I forgot to mention that my mom is a veteran elementary school teacher. So she's taught in both public and private, almost all the grade levels. And, she's reading this material, and it says, warning signs a child may display if they've been sexually abused. And she gets out a pen from her purse, and she starts to check off over 80% of these warning signs that I had displayed for years. And she just thought, I can't believe this. I mean, first of all, as an educator, but second of all, as a parent, I have never seen such simple material. I mean, I was all summed up in just one page of bullet points.
Wow.
And she thought, if I could have just seen this sooner, I could have stopped it from happening, or at least stopped it from happening for as long as it went on. So after that, so from her experience, not having the proper education, and from my experience as a student, not having opportunities to tell, the idea for Jennas Law was born. And I will say, for the training piece, it's so important because for me, this was not mentioned to me in a preventative manner. So, for example, my parents didn't have a body safety conversation with me. My church didn't have one. My school didn't have one. So none of my safe places were talking about this. So as a child, I concluded, well, this must be something then that's better left unspoken. And that's the message that we send to children and youth, when we aren't the first ones as safe adults to open that door of communication for them and say, hey, if something does happen, I'm a safe person to tell.
Tan, let's bring you in on this. How did you and Jenna meet?
No, well, thank you, Jeff, for bringing light to this horrific topic, and that's why we're so focused on preventing child sexual abuse. And so Jenna's just an amazing, courageous survivor, as you've heard. My wife and I, Beth, first met Jenna literally when I was first elected to the legislature, to the House of Representatives back in 2007 timeframe. And we're just so taken back by her courageousness, her story, her bravery to tell this story. Imagine this young woman telling this story about how she'd been so horribly abused. And so as a result of that, my wife and I walked away saying, this is something that we have to take away. This is a charge to keep. We have to go to the legislature and do something meaningful in this regard. And so in 2009, I was blessed to be able to carry a piece of legislation to file a bill that would be the first of its kind in the nation, to really be a bill focused on preventing child sexual abuse and raising awareness. And so thankfully, the Lord's grace and the incredible courageousness of Jenna, we were able to move hearts to make this a priority in the legislature back at that time in 2009. We were able to make it through both the House and the Senate. Jenna testified in both those chambers, and we passed the bill. And so I named it in honor of Jenna. And so that's really kind of how it all came together. That's how we really have continued to evolve in our relationship and working together to fight this horrific thing. And so the net of it all is that today, Texas was the first state in the country to pass Jennas Law. Today, we're well over 25 states across the country where we've been advocating, and they have now implemented a form of Jennas Law. And we're now working to get this to become the law of the land at the federal level as well. We'll tell you more about that too, Jeff. But that's really how we met. We met at the Denton County Children's Advocacy Center there in Lewisville, Texas, in the middle of my House district years ago, and have maintained this incredible lifelong friendship of working together to protect all the kids in this state, in this nation, so they never experience the kind of things that poor Jenna did.
Sure. And Jenna, I applaud you as well that you had the courage to step out there and tell this story so publicly.
Exactly.
I know you've done countless interviews. We found one that we really liked. Let's go ahead and roll the CBN clip.
Jenna Quinn was 17 years old when a reporter approached her about featuring her story. Jenna agreed, but she wanted to be seen as a victor, not a victim. And since then, she's done the same for other survivors of sexual abuse.
Jenna Quinn is a child abuse prevention advocate, speaker, and author. She helped implement Jennas Law, which requires sex abuse education in Texas. Today, similar legislation has been mandated in over half of America's schools. And while she knows all the statistics about child sex abuse, her fight against this epidemic comes from her own personal experience. Jenna was 13 when her best friend's father sexually assaulted her for the first time. Intense shame, fear, and withdrawal followed. Then, after 3 years of suffering in silence, she finally broke free from the abuse and brought her tormentor to justice. In her book, Pure in Heart, Jenna shares her journey through sexual assault, from fear to forgiveness. She gives warning signs to look for and offers hope to survivors.
Wow. And if you're wondering if your state has a law or legislation in the works, go to Jenna's website, and you have a page. We're going to put it up on the screen where it's an interactive map. Do you want to describe that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So there's a map there. I get asked questions, quite often about, what about this state or what about that state, or how's the law broken down? How's the law implemented? And those are all really good questions. But it's all going to be there for you in one place on this interactive map. So you can click on your state and see if anything's been filed, what the summary of that is, and also, read a little bit more about it. So,
Absolutely. So,
yeah.
Tan, have you experienced any resistance to this? Because it seems so obvious.
Well, Jeff, look, when I first introduced the bill, a lot of folks would ask, why are we talking about this topic? It wasn't something that we talked about in 2009 or so vintage in this country. And I just felt passionately that we needed to bring light to this darkness. It is a horrific epidemic. It affects children in every aspect of this nation, every economic group, every ethnicity, every geography. And so we just have got to continue to shed a light and to raise awareness. And that's really what we're trying to do. It was, again, because of Jenna's courageousness. This legislation would never have passed in Texas, and we'd never been in 25 plus states, and wouldn't be now working to get this done at the federal level in Washington if it hadn't been for this young girl's bravery. And so that's, my wife and I will always be so impressed and grateful for her passion to protect other children. That's really where it came from for her. I mean, as a young woman herself, it was all about protecting other children from ever having the unspeakable things that she had to experience in her life.
Sure, and the original bill that you passed continues to be amended. Is that right?
Well, that's right. So I passed the original bill in 2009, and then I've modified it a couple of times since that over the years and other legislative sessions. Originally, we focused on K through 12 in Texas, and we expanded it to college campuses, and it's all of the training and awareness, the signs and things to be aware of, so to speak, so that we can avoid these things going forward. And so that's what we've been doing here in Texas and now these other states, and now we'll be doing at the federal level with God's grace and the support of members of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. We'll be doing it just as we're doing in Texas, but we'll have a little bit additional financial horsepower behind it for implementation, if that makes sense.
Jenna, let's bring you back. Does this cover like daycare centers, or who's covered by Jenna's Law?
Yeah, so it looks a little different in every state, but in Texas, yes, daycares are included. Originally, the original model legislation that Tan so courageously sponsored, and you did a lot of work for that, Tan. I know you are giving me credit, but he is such a champion for children and has consistently been, since his first term. And so I'm just grateful that we're still moving forward and doing everything we can.
Nothing more
for
important
these kids.
than protecting our kids. At the end of the
That's
day,
right.
that's all, what matters most to every American and every Texan. If we're not taking care of our kids, then why are we in these offices in the first place?
Sure.
That's it. So yes, yeah.
On the federal level, what's the latest?
Well, we're excited. John Cornyn, along with Maggie Hassan, so it's a bipartisan bill, a Republican and a Democrat are moving it through the U.S. Senate. We think that will move through very quickly in days from now. It will be moving through the United States Senate, and then it will, of course, move over to the House. And we've got strong sponsors there as well. Unfortunately, the bill was passed out of the Senate in the 21 session of Congress, but it did not make it through the U.S. House. And so our hope and prayer is that members of the U.S. House, that the Speaker and everyone else will recognize the importance of getting Jenna's Law passed here in this 22 session. And so it'll come out of the Senate days from now, and we hope that the House will move it just as quickly.
And it's essentially, if you see something, say something. But Jenna, as you pointed out, you're very close to your folks, and they couldn't see it.
That's exactly right. It's no different than looking for warning signs for, any other, life-threatening illness or something where you can actually see clear warning signs like heart attack or heart disease. There's warning signs, and the fact of the matter is, it's very simple. We didn't know what they were. And even in my case, in my parents' case, when we went back and we learned about grooming, the stages of grooming, and how these child offenders will literally groom the caregivers, they will groom the survivors themselves. And there are essentially 7 stages of grooming, and it's not till stage 6 where you actually get to the sexual contact abuse. So it is very manipulative, it is very strategic, and the fact of the matter is that a lot of it happens in person, a lot of it happens online, and we need to be talking about this, for goodness sakes.
Sure. And does it often involve the person doing the grooming is making friends with the family to say, look, I'm safe?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes. They will go out of their way and to be very intentional about, forming relationships, looking as though they're a very trusted person, and, trying to give special attention to that child or to that youth, giving gifts, giving money, being over complimentary, possibly giving hugs that linger a little too long, trying to get that child alone and bring up inappropriate topics. And, you talk to children and youth these days, and a lot of that does happen. A lot of that happens online, through texting, through gaming, through apps. And so we really, really now more than ever, because we have wonderful smart devices, we really need to be diligent about training youth and children and talking about body safety and giving them opportunities to disclose.
And Tan, the numbers that we have are only numbers of people who have reported. Do you think there are countless children who are still keeping this a secret?
No question, Jeff, 100%, right? Since we passed Jenna's Law, and the number of reporting occurrences is dramatically higher than it ever was. So we know it's working very effectively. The agencies here in Texas know it's working very effectively. But yes, what drives me as a lawmaker, why I continue to focus on this topic, we continue to do things with Jenna's Law, we continue to do things that are very close in correlation, like stopping human trafficking. Yeah. All of this type of information, all these things are all interconnected. And yes, what drives us is that we know that there are innocent children that just today, right now as we're broadcasting this, that they are literally being horribly tortured, treated, abused, and they're not able to understand how to get out of this box that they're in. How do they find a path forward to escape, to talk to a trusted loved one or friend? And so that's why we're doing this. We're trying to raise awareness so that every child has the opportunity to get to a safe place and never experience these horrible injustices of child sexual abuse.
Jenna, let's talk about your book, Pure in Heart. I love that name. How did you come up with the name? There is, I had some good support. Thank goodness I was believed, because that's a whole nother topic, for another time in training, is disclosures and delayed disclosures and, believing a child when they finally do, get the courage to tell. But I was very grateful to receive counseling from the Denton County Children's Advocacy Center, where I grew up. And, it's so important that kids do receive counseling, and it doesn't matter what age you are. It's never too late to go in and say, I feel like I need to address this with someone, because every survivor struggles with shame. I never met a child, or I never met a youth that didn't feel like they did something to bring this on, feel like they did something wrong. And so it is very fundamental that there is a level of shame, blame, and fear and guilt, because I have had the wonderful privilege to counsel with hundreds of survivors and have heard several stories. And although the situations might be different, the effects and the impact to the spirit is the same.
And so, we are not to be unaware of the enemy's tactics. And so we can look at that and we can say, you know what, if I'm a child of God, and we all are, then I have nothing to be ashamed of. When Jesus died for us on that cross, he scorned shame, and he left shame in the tomb. So we leave it entombed and we leave it there. And so it's called pure in heart, because you'll have a 6-year-old girl that will look at you and say, am I still a virgin in God's eyes? And that's a real question. So I'm going to say that because that needs to be said. We can't keep those, feelings in the dark. We got to talk about this, because we have to put shame back in its place, and it needs to go back onto the evil and the condemnation that brought it in the first place. And so that's always been my heart. That's always been my message, is to help people break free through the power of the Holy Spirit. I love, one of my favorite verses says that the anointing breaks the yoke. And so it is the anointing of the Holy Spirit that can break the oppression, that can break the fear, that can break the shame that the enemy tries to use against survivors to keep them in silence and to keep them in bondage. And so the book is not, there's no details about, what actually happened. It's really about the effects and how do we break free from that.
So we're running out of time. So, Tan, how can people get involved? Is it writing their congressperson, or how can people get involved?
Well, no, great question. Thank you for asking that. So first of all, again, I think they need to reach out to legislators in their own state if they don't have a Jennas Law already today, from a state-to-state perspective, and to reach out to myself directly, to reach out to Jenna to provide guidance. I'm happy to share the model bill in Texas and so forth, and how we can get it in their state. But beyond that, yes, as we now move this bill through the federal level, if you will reach out to your U.S. senators and you'll reach out to your members of Congress and encourage them. Do it by call, do it by email, do it by letters, all the above. The more channels, the better that you touch members of Congress. Then we'll be successful in getting Jennas Law passed for the good of the nation, to protect all of America's kids. And that's really the objective. And so we'd be so grateful for folks that are in the listening audience to make sure they reach out to members of Congress and to let them know that Jenna Quinn's Law, Jennas Law, must pass here in this 22 session.
Jenna, we'll give you the final word.
Well, I want to say, Jeff, thank you for being a forerunner to address this issue really in the first place. So I'm so grateful for the platform that you have and the diligence that you have shown through that to raise awareness such as these. And, the truth of the matter is that people don't talk about it because, it can provoke a sense of shame. It can be uncomfortable. It's not a dinner conversation. But we can change that by reframing how we view it and see it through the lens of hope. People say, oh, I'm a speaker and I share my testimony and I talk about child sexual abuse. And you hear like, oh, well, we don't want to talk about that here. We only want to talk about positive things, or we don't want to address that. And I said, but I have good news. There's a way to prevent this. There's a way to identify this, and there's hope for survivors if it has happened. So
wow, really one of my most powerful shows I've ever done. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you, Jeff.
We're going to end with 2 websites. First, Jenna's website, which is jennaquinn.org, and then your website, Tan, is tanparker.com. Thank you both for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you.
That's it for now. We'll see you next time.